Biology. We're still in chapter 17, the ectothermic vertebrates, again, the cold blooded vertebrates. And this time, we're looking at chapter 17, part C, class Amphibia, also known as the amphibians. So, just a real quick look at the amphibians. So, first, what we have is some of the key characteristics. So, amphibia literally means double life, or like two sided life, double life. Okay, so that's if you take the Greek and look at what's going on with that. So, one of the things that's going on is amphibians are characterized by having an aquatic part of their life cycle in which they breathe with gills, and a terrestrial part of their life cycle in which they breathe with the lungs. That's generally speaking what's going on. All amphibians at some point breathe with gills. Most of them breathe with lungs, though not all have lungs, or at least there are varying levels at which they have fully functioning lungs. So that's one of the things that's going on. That aspect of like that double life kind of metamorphosis, the aquatic for some time and terrestrial or land dwelling for another time. Another thing we could say is their skin lacks scales and is often moist, so scaleless, moist skin, usually moist. That's something else. These are general characteristics. Next, they have three chambered hearts. So like the human heart has four chambers. We'll talk about that later on in the school year. Some animals have two chambered hearts. The amphibians have three chambered hearts. And then their feet lack claws and maybe webbed. Usually it's like if they are fairly aquatic in their adult stage, they'll have webbed feet. But if nothing else, they do not have claws. And then they sometimes practice hibernation or estivation. You've probably heard the term hibernation, but estivation might be new. What's going on with that is so hibernation is when the temperatures are getting cold and it might be dangerous or difficult for the animal to live. And so it goes into a partially shut down kind of a phase where it really slows down its metabolism and it goes into, I mean, like with computers, you literally have the hibernation mode where it's like it almost shuts down the computer but not quite. It just kind of puts things on pause for a little while. So that's when things are cold, but then you have the opposite that is estivation. So this is where if the temperatures are getting too warm and it might be dangerous for the animal, then a lot of amphibians are able to go into a state of estivation where again it's very similar to hibernation. They are partially shutting down aspects of their body in order to wait out the temperatures not being ideal for them, and then once the temperatures return to of a more ideal state, then they're able to come out of their hibernation or estivation and return to normal. And I put in parentheses because it's kind of assumed here that with characteristics of amphibians that we're talking about vertebrates and that they are ectothermic because they are in the ectothermic vertebrate category. But it doesn't quite work if you're talking about how are amphibians different from other ectothermic vertebrates. So they are characterized by being vertebrates and ectothermic, but that doesn't set them apart from other animals that are also in the ectothermic vertebrate group. All right, so that's that. Next, we have three orders of amphibians. First, there's order Apoda, and it literally means without foot. And what these are characterized by is their tropical worm like or snake like bodies. And then an example would be the caecilians. And I'll have a couple of pictures here for you in just a second. So, caecilians, yeah, they have long worm like or snake like bodies, usually found in tropical places. They're still amphibians as far as like the skin and the heart and the metamorphosis of water dwelling versus usually land dwelling. And yeah, so there are about 160 species of these. So, a few caecilians. This is one. You can see it almost kind of looks like a giant worm. It almost kind of looks like a snake, but it's technically an amphibian. And then here's another one. I think its head is the most amphibian looking thing. Its head might not look that much like a frog, but it looks a bit like a salamander head to me. And then a little bit more of a close up of the head of one that is living an aquatic life here. Some of them even have kind of close to, you can see the little nostril slits there. Some of them have little antennas that are there that give them a little bit of extra senses. All right, so that's order Apoda. Next, we have order Caudata. You might recall we have the caudal fin of a fish. We have the term caudal, meaning of or related to the tail. So order Caudata literally means tail. And all right, what characterizes these? They have a slender body with 4 identical limbs on a trunk. They also have a more distinct head, trunk, tail, and then their 4 identical limbs that are coming out from the trunk. We say identical because unlike frogs, where the front limbs are very different from the hind limbs, salamanders, their 4 limbs are roughly identical to each other. And again, yeah, a body that is pretty distinct: head, trunk, tail. And I've used the term salamanders a couple times. That is the main thing we think of when we think of order Caudata. Newts are also in this order. Newts are pretty similar to salamanders. And approximately 400 species here. So a few pictures. There is a salamander. Kind of cute. Nice little yellow spots. Look at how wet the skin looks. That's one of the things that characterizes a lot of the amphibians, is even when they're living on the land, they tend to have very moist skin. And same kind of salamander. A lot of amphibians just look like they're almost like they have these big smiles permanently. And their eyes kind of bugging out like that. Although, a little side note on eyes, frogs, when they stick their tongue out to capture their prey and then retract their tongue back into their mouth, the mechanism that they often use to get the prey unstuck from the tongue is the frog sucks its eyeballs into its mouth a little bit. I'm not literally sucking his eyeballs into his mouth, but it creates so much suction in his mouth that it pulls his eyeballs in toward his mouth, and that pressure helps dislodge the prey from being on the frog's tongue. But anyway. All right, and then types of salamanders. So you might be able to tell that what we were just looking at, I'm pretty sure, is a California tiger salamander. Maybe a fire salamander, but the markings looked more similar to a California tiger salamander. The Japanese giant salamander that you see on the right is one of the biggest amphibians. There's, I think, an ever so slightly larger Chinese giant salamander. The Japanese giant salamander oftentimes gets to be a little over 5 feet long. The Chinese giant salamander, I think, peaks out around 5'7", maybe 5'9". Yep. Speaking of salamanders, let me give you number 4 of your video questions. Number 4 is some olm salamanders. That's a type smaller, usually kind of pale white salamander. Olm is spelled O-L-M. But anyway, some olm salamanders have been observed to live how long? And this is ones that have been at some aquarium or zoo, and we've been able to observe how long it lives. And the answer is 70 years. 70 as in 70. 70 years is how long some salamanders have been observed to live. We think that in nature, it's likely that some of these salamanders have lived over 100 years old, but we have verified it at 70 years. Okay, so that is a little bit that order Caudata. And a little video about the Japanese giant salamander.
This is the planet we share. Each week we travel above, below, and across its surface on a journey of discovery. From Africa, we cross the world to Japan, where giant salamanders must search for a large enough habitat to survive. In Okayama, Japan, locals celebrate a legendary amphibian, the Japanese giant salamander, once faced extinction due to hunting and habitat destruction. Now, it's making a comeback. Most species of salamanders and their close relatives, the newts, average just a few inches in length, like this palm-sized firebelly. But Japanese giant salamanders can grow up to 5 feet in length and weigh 36 kilograms. That's 80 pounds. Known in Japanese as the osansho, or pepperfish, this salamander is entirely aquatic and nocturnal.
Look at that.
During the day, these shy creatures burrow into the riverbanks to hide. It's a relic of the species. This animal has hardly changed for the past 20 million years. Judging by its ancient appearance, that's not hard to believe. Authorities have outlawed hunting the creature, but its habitat is still at risk. The hustle and bustle of modern Japan is hardly ideal for a giant amphibian. More than 125 million people live in this nation of small islands, and land is at an absolute premium. But the real threat to the salamander is here. Dams created to control flooding. Kyoto gets an average of 64 inches of rain a year, much of it during the monsoon season. The network of dams and floodgates prevent the city from getting waterlogged, but they are a barrier to the life cycle of the giant salamanders. Herpetologist Dr. Akira Mori is working on a solution.
もう今現在一番の脅威はもう河川工事とかでその川を、治水のためにこうまっすぐにするとか、あるいはこのダムを作る堰堤を作って一つは山椒の隠れ場所をなくしてしまうってことなんです。
In this rare night footage, a giant salamander struggles back upstream after becoming trapped in a dam spillway. When the banks of rivers are covered in concrete for flood control, the salamander's habitat is destroyed.
そういう場所は産卵する場所として使うので、そういう大きな岩の下の隙間とかがなくなってしまうともう産卵できないんですね。
To combat the problem, Akira Mori and his colleagues at Kyoto University have devised a complex system of ramps and staircases to modify the dams. They allow the giant salamanders to maneuver upriver beyond the dams and back to the mountain streams, where they can lay their eggs and continue their species. Zoos worldwide have had some success breeding the Japanese giant salamander in captivity. But Japan hopes that by creating a shortcut around the dam, it will allow these giants to flourish in their natural habitat as well.
All right. Sorry about how loud the soundtrack music was for that video. They didn't balance that very well. Two thoughts that came to mind based on that one. So first, just a little term that came up. There was that guy that they talked to, and he was introduced as a herpetologist, and that's the term for a person who studies amphibians. Herpe, herpy, like herpy, herpetologist. And then, but just generally speaking, that is one of the difficult things sometimes with deciding different types of progress or construction is considering how and what kind of an impact is that going to have on some of these species and some of the aspects of the environment in the area. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we look at chapter 19, I believe, which brings us into some of the ecology considerations. And it really is amazing how finely balanced, how fine-tuned the balance is for a lot of different organizations and how they fit into the food chain, and how if you introduce something new or remove something that was there, how much of an impact it can have sometimes. But then you just have to balance that sometimes with, okay, well, how much of a detriment is this going to be, and what kind of benefit are we going to get from what we're considering doing? All right, let's do video question number 2, because we're just looking at one of the biggest amphibians. Number 2 relates to the biggest frog, and the question is, how long do some Goliath frogs get? Yes, the name of the frog is the Goliath frog. And the answer is 32 inches. So what that would be is if you took it and you extended his hind legs, so his hind legs were out straight, it would be 32 inches long. So we're talking like almost a yardstick in length is the Goliath frog. So number 2, again, how long do some Goliath frogs get? Answer, 32 inches. Okay, so that was, wait a second. That's not the right, oh yeah, okay. This is not the right slide. Sorry about that. Uh, that should be, so, oh no, this is the right slide. I'm sorry, I was thinking of something else. Okay, so next we're at odor. It's not odor anura, it's order anura. I wonder if I spelled that wrong on the other ones. Order anura, and literally means without tail, and these are the frogs. And all right, so what generally characterizes the frogs here? We have a large head. They don't have a tail, they're tailless, as the name implies. They have short front limbs with larger muscular hind limbs. And the main thing we think of here is frogs, and there are approximately 3,900 species of frog. And what I have next are just some pictures of just the crazy variety that there is in frogs. So you have this one. Oh, I had in mind what this is called, but I don't remember now. Oh, this is I think a Japanese bullfrog. Yeah, Japanese bullfrog. A type of flying frog. I think with the reptiles video or reptiles section, I might show you a video that briefly goes into some of the flying reptiles and amphibians, quote unquote flying. They more just glide a long ways, but this one is one of the best, if not the best, of all amphibians and reptiles for amount of distance he's able to cover from where he jumps. Just beautiful colors that you get sometimes and interesting patterns and shapes. This is the black rain frog, native to South Africa. Decently camouflaged there. We'll see some in a moment that are even a lot better camouflaged. So I think the mossy frog, or maybe just the moss frog. Yeah, check those out. So you have 3 frogs there, and they blend in super well with those leaves. So it kind of looks like he's a bodybuilder. Question is, will one of them get the dragonfly, and if so, which one? Look at the blues going on their webs. This is a type of poison dart frog. This is the golden poison dart frog, I believe. And that relates to number 1 of your video questions. Question is, 1 ounce of poison from a poison dart frog is enough to kill how many people? 1 ounce of poison from a poison dart frog is enough to kill how many people? The answer is 2.5 million. That is how poisonous the poison from some frogs are. Usually the poisonous frogs are small and very brightly colored. Bright colors are usually nature's way of saying, caution, beware, look out. And yeah, so like for example, there's a type of poison dart frog in India, and some of the indigenous groups will capture some, and they have a way of like pressing on its head to make some of the poison get secreted. And once they have gotten some of the poison out of it, then they take their darts or their arrows and they're able to just dip the tip of it. And that makes it so that if they are hunting or if they're in some kind of warfare with another tribe, the tips of their arrows or darts have that poison on it and make it very lethal, very deadly. Okay, so that was video question number 1. And yeah, just, I mean, the colors and the patterns, it's really beautiful. All right, so just a little bit more about amphibians. So amphibian skin, a couple things about it. As we were just talking, some amphibians secrete poisons. And then amphibians can breathe through their skin, kind of like what we talked about with the earthworms. About as one of the reasons for the moisture on the skin is the moisture on the skin facilitates oxygen from the air dissolving into the water that is on the skin, and then from there the oxygen gets absorbed through the skin. And then also camouflage with chromatophores. So, and this takes two different forms. One is just permanent coloration that makes the frog be kind of camouflaged with its environment. But then some frogs also do change their color. It might be a seasonal thing where they change their colors. Some frogs even can change their color based on, as far as we can tell, basically its mood or its emotions, that it'll have a change in color that is happening dealing with its chromatophores. All right, so those would be some of the functions that the skin serves. And then next we have respiration. There are four different ways that amphibians can breathe, quote unquote breathe, can you know, get oxygen into its body. First is with gills, and then with lungs, and then through the lining of the mouth and throat. So air that gets into the mouth and throat, some of the oxygen in the air can diffuse through the lining of the mouth and throat into the body, and then also through the skin. All right, a little frog related video here. That one totally missed. Okay, there you go. I think I heard a little bit of croaking there. It was just really brief, but that makes me think of another little tidbit about frogs, toads. Each different species has its own unique croaking that it does, and each species, like their brains are finely tuned to hear and understand, and to really notice the croakings that is specific to that species. Anyway, oh, next video. Here we go. Okay, so that's not real. It was some commercial that some group did. I don't even know for sure what it was a commercial for, but thought that was pretty funny. But that relates a little bit to video question number 5. Number 5 is, a frog can usually lift how much weight with its tongue? And so, depending on the species, we can't give like a weight in terms of pounds. We can relate it to its body weight. And the answer is 1.4 times its body weight. 1.4 times its body weight. So, to put that into perspective, that would be like I weigh around 150 pounds. 1.4 times my body weight would be about 210 pounds. So, that would be like me lifting 210 pounds with my tongue. It's like what would be going on there. Okay. And then just a little bit about frogs versus toads, because you're probably familiar with both of those terms and might wonder what's the difference between a frog and a toad. So a couple of the differences. First, as far as their skin is concerned, frogs usually have moist, smooth skin, whereas toads usually have drier, bumpy skin. And then with their eggs, frogs lay their eggs in bunches, as in like little piles of eggs, whereas toads lay their eggs in long strands, and you can just like see like a little strand, like a line of eggs, another line of eggs, another line of eggs. And then frogs have longer legs. We're talking about their hind legs, versus toads have a little bit shorter of legs. And then when you look at the tadpoles, they have slender tadpoles versus toads have more rounded tadpoles. And that also relates to the adult body that they grow into as well. Frogs are usually a little more slender, toads are usually a little more pudgy. Um, but speaking of tadpoles, video question number 3. So there's this species of frog where biologists, herpetologists had identified the tadpole, and the tadpole it would get up to 14 inches long. But the biologists had never, for a long time, been able to find the adult version of this frog, and they even started to wonder if this this species only had a tadpole that never developed into a frog form, an adult form. And that's what they thought for a long time until they finally found, oh, this is what's going on. And what was going on is the 14-inch tadpole would quote unquote grow into a 1.6-inch long frog. And yeah, and that relates to the name that they ended up giving to this species. They gave it the name the paradoxical frog. It's like this frog is like such a paradox that the 14-inch long tadpole would grow into a 1.6-inch frog. So the question I have here is how does the size of the adult paradoxical frog compare to the size of the tadpole? And the answer is 1/9. In other words, the adult frog is 1/9 the size of the tadpole. And that wraps it up for class Amphibia. And then next time we take a real quick look at reptiles. I say real quick, as in probably about the same length as this one. And that will wrap it up for the ectothermic vertebrates. And then next chapter, we'll get into the endothermic vertebrates. Okay, that's it. Hope things are going well. Let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll quote unquote see you next time.